Hi, Harry. Welcome to TwiceTold.
Hi, thank you for having me.
The pleasure is all mine. I'd like to start by introducing you to the concept behind TwiceTold. So, TwiceTold is an exchange between author and reader. Both of us visit the book from our own perspectives. Me from the point of view of having read it, you from the point of view of having written it. Why TwiceTold is that the book was essentially told or expressed the first time when it hit print. You may have had a different idea about the book when you wanted to write about it. That idea evolved when you started writing it. A couple of iterations might still be in your computer, manuscript, at your editor's office. Your editor might have given it a completely different twist. But once the book hit the print run, it got told the first time. I read this book with some information, perhaps some misinformation, some biases, call it whatever, and I formed these series of impressions. And today I'd like to clarify those impressions with you in this virtual meeting. And hopefully, I am confident I'll walk back with a lot more information, but I can only hope that some of these questions also help you probe into what you've written about. I'd not thought about that before. So I
That
hope
sounds
for a aha moment for both of us.
that sounds great, and you're so right because often, I mean, as French intellectuals often argue, reading a book is pretty much as creative a process as actually writing the thing, and every book is different for every reader. And yeah, time and again, I've been asked things that make me think about books I've written and thought, heck, I never really saw that. But now you said it, yeah, it's an interesting idea. Maybe it was at the back of my mind or something like that. Yeah, it sounds good.
That's fantastic. So my first question, Harry, is going to be why did you think about writing this book and what information is it that you're presenting that didn't exist or you thought was not told sufficiently clear before?
Right. I'd always been interested in gladiators. I mean, I teach ancient history at Oxford. I spent my entire career teaching ancient history at 7 different universities. I'd never studied gladiators, and there I wanted to know more about them. So I just started doing some reading on them. And I think there were two things. One was really, it sounds very cynical, but almost a gap in the market. There were a lot of scholarly books on gladiators, and most of them are actually very hard to read. They ask demand an awful lot of the reader. They're not accessible. And then on the other hand, there are a lot of popular books which contain massive amounts of misinformation, and they just repeat the standard tropes from one book to another. So what I want to do is I wanted to go back and engage with the original sources, the ancient writers, archaeology, the ancient visual images, and kind of see what impressions, what patterns emerge for me. And I think the main one was the spur to write the book was to put gladiators and gladiatorial combat back in the right context, both the immediate context of the fact they are part of 24 hours of entertainment in Rome and later in the provinces, but also put them back in the center of, as it were, the Roman thought world, the Roman mind. In They were very central to Roman thinking, Roman self-identity, and that's kind of what I was trying to do when I set out to write the book.
Understood. Now, the chapters in your book, are these measures of Roman time according to which you have divided this book?
Yep, they are. I mean, obviously, measuring time is always tricky before clocks, watches, accurate chronometers. Yeah, the ancient Romans had very sophisticated sundials, very sophisticated water clocks, but yeah, the vast majority of people didn't have access to these. So yeah, they ordered time in a kind of sort of chunks of the day way. And one of the interesting things that about the Romans and us and the differences and similarities is just like us, they had 24 hours in a day, but their hours varied in length because there's always, for the Romans, 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of darkness. So obviously, an hour of daylight is very long, much longer than an hour in midsummer, and it's only about 45 minutes long in the winter. But yeah, the ordering principle of the book, the 24-hour structure, I actually was inspired to do by a brilliant book by a Cambridge Don called Colin Jones, which is a totally different subject. I happen to read it because it got a great review in the Sunday Times here in the UK. It's called "The Fall of Robespierre: A Day in the French Revolution," and he used one day, and I thought, yeah, that's a great framing device, so I can explore the entire 24 hours of gladiatorial combat and use it kind of as a window to view all sorts of other things that are connected to gladiators, but most of us wouldn't automatically, they wouldn't come to mind if you're just thinking about gladiators normally. So there's loads of stuff in there about sex, sleep, dreams, loads of good stuff. Attitudes to the natural world, also, yeah, crime, punishment, civilization, barbarity, you name it. The book almost kind of tries to build into a fairly comprehensive history of Roman culture, Roman thinking through the lens of the gladiator.
Understood. So, shall we dive into some spoilers, if you may, about this book, clearing misconceptions and ideas about gladiators? For the most part, the first time I discovered the term gladiator was through Russell Crowe's films. I realized over time that this is nothing that how is nothing how reality actually transpired. So, could you walk us through a couple of more spoilers?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I mean, I thought the Russell Crowe film, the first Gladiator movie, was great. Really good movie. But yeah, it does kind of perpetuate the Hollywood idea of gladiatorial combat. It's mass battles. You know, there are lots of guys fighting in the arena at once, and almost everyone dies, with the exception of Russell Crowe. Well, until the end. Sorry if no one's seen the film. He doesn't. He dies in the last shot. And of course, it was nothing like that. I mean, there were very, very occasionally mass combats, but they're as the colloquial English expression would be as rare as hen's teeth. I mean, once in a blue moon, an emperor will put on a mass battle to celebrate a huge victory or something. But no, usually gladiatorial combat is a duel between two men who are very carefully matched in terms of skill and experience, and either have the same or deliberately contrasting equipment, and it's a duel, and they don't all die. You actually have a really quite good chance of surviving as a gladiator. So yeah, that I think they're pretty big misconceptions that I wanted to clear up. It's not all mass battles, and it's not all carnage.
Understood. So the clear takeaway is that gladiators didn't always die, but as I dive into the book, I also read that a lot of these gladiators were pot-bellied and not your heavily muscled warriors. Why might that be? I mean, wouldn't that impede their fighting capabilities?
For some, yes, because gladiators, the light armed guys, especially the famous one, the Retiarius, the guy who fights with a net and a trident and no armor at all. Well, some shoulder and armor on his left arm, and that's it. I mean, obviously, he relies on speed, agility to get out of trouble. But most gladiators were what were called heavy shield men, people like the Murmillo or the Secutor. And these guys have very heavy helmets, the big shields, a very short sword. Now, the idea for them in the Roman world was they were bulked up with a very special diet. It was called sagina, which translates literally as stuffing, with connotations of animal feed. They're bulked up so that they can take a wound and bleed. But because of, in modern medical terms, a thick layer of subcutaneous fat, the blade is less likely to hit a vital organ. So they're less likely to die. It's kind of almost a defense mechanism. Now, weirdly enough, I've done some interviews because this book came out in the UK some months before it has in the US. And this is just something that really has caught a lot of weird people on the internet's attention. And you get all these sort of shouty comments of, no, all gladiators were lean and mean and ripped. Well, A, how do these people know? And B, they weren't. They appear to have been pretty hefty guys in the main. And archaeology kind of proves that. We've got a gladiator cemetery from Ephesus in modern Turkey. And forensic pathologists who studied it, their skeletons, these skeletons are big. They show a surprising degree of very serious healed wounds. They had good medical care, but the framework is of the skeleton is tends to be big enough to support a very heavy guy and designed for short bursts of intense physical activity. And you need big bones to carry a big weight around. I mean, they're kind of more like okay, the rugby analogy doesn't usually work in America, and I can't put it in American football terms. So I don't know enough about it. They're more like the forwards, the big guys in rugby in the scrum, rather than the fast, speedy ones who are the three quarters, who are the running backs. Yeah. But yeah, for some reason, people seem very upset by this idea that gladiators didn't all look like a young Russell Crowe. I've no idea why. Why are modern people getting so upset about this?
You're hurting the emotional core. I mean, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure a lot of these men came of age watching Russell Crowe fight it out in the arena, and they kind of formed an emotional bond with that idea. And here comes your book, and it just flies in their face. Sure enough, I could take it objectively. I had no beef with in the fight. I had no dog in the fight, so I was okay with that. Sure, I mean the average gladiator is probably kind of podgy, might be fat as well while they're fighting in the arena, and I'm okay with it.
I'm glad. I'm glad I haven't upset you. I mean, I have the physique of a typical. I was a rugby forward, so I was always, as we were so delicately called by our own coaches, we were the fat boys at the front.
That's mean and that's hard.
Yeah, well, in those days, rugby coaches didn't really care about our feelings. They spent a lot of time shouting at us on the lines of "You fat lazy bastard, do some more work."
That sounds so much like Oliver Reed screaming
Yeah,
from his Ludius.
yeah. Maybe there is a connection there between the Oliver Reed gladiator trainer and a rugby coach back in the day in England. They were all ex-army sergeants, so they were used to screaming at people.
Understood. Now, could you tell us about how and why did this tradition of gladiatorial combat evolve in Rome?
Right, it's quite interesting. The Romans, later Romans, gave an exact date to it in our terms, 264 BC. The first gladiatorial combats happened in Rome, three pairs of fighters, six fighters at the funeral of a senator. What's interesting is that later Roman writers, because we don't have any from that time, were unanimous that gladiatorial combat was an import from somewhere else, but they didn't really know where. So some of them are saying, "Oh, we took it on from the north, from Etruria in Italy," and others are going, "No, no, no, it's from the south, from Campania in Italy." And one Greek living under Rome actually said, "No, no, actually, we Greeks invented it somewhere in the Peloponnese." So clearly, they didn't really know where gladiatorial combat was imported from, but they all thought it was an import. Now, if that was us, you and me, we'd be going, "Well, we didn't invent it." Maybe from moral qualms, because people are dying. It's in our terms, modern terms, a sadistic spectacle. But it's very different for the Romans. It's actually part of a really serious ideology of theirs that we've conquered the world, and with every people we've conquered, we have adopted from them the best practices, whether it's philosophy from the Greeks, or whether it's a kind of sword from the Spaniards, or chainmail from the Gauls. And we have then taken this and we have perfected it and made it better. So when all these Roman writers are saying, "Yeah, we didn't invent gladiatorial combat," what they're really saying is, "No, but we conquered some people who did, and we then improved it and made it the wonderful thing it is now."
Understood. What did the gladiatorial arena offer to its various stakeholders? Now, by stakeholders, I mean the audience who attended it, the senators and other senior executives who sponsored it, and the emperor who possibly used this as a diversion for sponsoring expensive wars or not sanctioning state intervention for plague instances or fending off mass starvation.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Let's deal with the stakeholders first. The guys who actually, the executives who actually put on shows. Under the Republic, and Rome was a republic in 264, Gladiator introduced, it remains a republic conventionally till 31 BC, when Octavian beats Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. And in those centuries, senators put on gladiatorial shows, and it's really quite straightforward. They're vote winners. These senators need the people of Rome, the plebs urbana, to actually vote them into office, vote for laws that they and their friends approve of, against laws they don't like. And putting on bigger and better gladiatorial shows is a surefire vote winner. And that kind of, as you just said and implied, carries on when the Republic is overthrown and you get the rule of the emperors. Each emperor puts on shows to win popularity with his subjects. And again, there's an inflation of the size of shows, the lavishness of shows. Because if you've just killed the previous emperor in a civil war, and you want to put on a show and win the people of Rome over, it's no good putting on a show that's just the same as his. It's got to be the guy you've just usurped and killed. It's got to be bigger. It's got to be better. It's got to have more novelty, more exotic animals, more weird things. It's an exponential growth. So yeah, it's really clear what the guys giving the shows get out of it, and that carries on under the empire out in the provinces. The local big men in a town somewhere. Let's pick one. Okay, there's an amphitheatre, remains of an amphitheatre in the small town of Colchester, in Essex. So the local civic magistrates of ancient Colchester, they're doing what the senators did under the Republic. They're getting votes and popularity, so they and their family remain the big men in the local Senate House. What the crowd get out of it is entertainment. There's a tradition of giving. The giver of the games has to throw gifts, have gifts thrown and showered on the audience. You get excitement, entertainment, and you also get to see the core Roman identity, virtues, courage, played out before you. What the gladiators get out of it is glory, a prize if you win, a monetary prize, and of course the chance of actually living through your term as a gladiator and coming out the other end and merging back into respectable, as it would be put, society.
Understood. Now, let's dive into the gladiators for a moment. Now, dividing these gladiators between free men who signed up to perform in the arena and the condemned. So, how did each of these gladiators view themselves and the arena, especially the condemned?
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, as you said, there are four main recruiting grounds for gladiators. First are prisoners of war, barbarian foreign prisoners of war. They've got no choice in it. Next are condemned criminals. Criminals condemned for serious crimes, for temple robbery, for murder. Then there are slaves who are sold by their masters into a gladiatorial school. And then there are free men, and they're very different backgrounds. Why do free men do it? I mean, the other guys have no choice at all. But they're regarded actually by Roman thinking, condemning a guy to a gladiatorial school or a prisoner of war to a gladiatorial school is actually quite merciful, because a prisoner of war or a guy condemned for murder, say, could just be executed on the spot, and you're giving these people a chance to actually to live. Why do free men do it? And that's the weird one for us. I mean, so modern people are thinking, why on earth would anyone do this? Like, the ancient poet Horace, one of the great Latin poets, has a really simple answer. It's because they're morally bad people. They're just bad men, and they like this sort of thing. But he does go on and say it's one specific type of bad guy. It's a young man from a rich family who has blown his inheritance on all the usual things young moralists accuse young men of blowing their money on: women, booze, food, fast racehorses. And he's run through all his inheritance, and he's now got no choice but to be either a carriage driver or a gladiator. I think if we strip out Horace's ancient elite moralizing, there's a really good point there. It's poverty. Because with Rome, with all the sort of the senators and their togas and the wonderful temples and the marble, it's easy for us to forget that 90% of the population of the Roman Empire were living pretty much on the subsistence level. Sometimes usually just above it, sometimes dipping disastrously below it. And the one thing you get if you enroll in a gladiatorial school is you're going to be fed. Okay, it's going to be the Sagina stuff that bulks you up, but you've got a roof over your head. You'll get several meals a day, and you get trained, and you get that chance to win money, win glory, become a sex symbol. So yeah, it's not as crazy a career choice as we might at first think to choose to go into a gladiatorial school.
Understood. What was the cash prize that a gladiator could expect to win, and what were the odds that this gladiator would survive and win that cash prize?
Good questions. It's really hard to answer any of them. The cash prizes are entirely at the discretion of the guy giving the games. So, I mean, you always win a symbolic palm of victory, a palm branch, but you get something in a salver or a bag of money. How much it was, and we've got isolated examples, which it's impossible to make an average out of. If you're fighting in front of the emperor and he likes you, it could be fabulous sums. If you're fighting in my hypothetical games in Colchester, given by a low-ranking civil servant, then the cash prize ain't going to be so good. What are your chances of surviving to get it? Really hard to say. I mean, modern scholarly estimates vary hugely. One French scholar puts the the likelihood of death in any given bout as high as 1 in 4. Whereas an American scholar, way higher, the likelihood of death is only 1 in 20. What I did in my book is I looked at a almost complete inscription from Pompeii, which had the program of fights on which a later graffiti artist had gone back and painted in the results, and which was really handy for me. And the answer was 1 in 8. So I've just used that also because it's an average between the other scholarly estimates. But to make it meaningful, we've got to try and work out how many years did they fight for, how many times a year. And the how many times a year is very hard to actually get an average. We have one tombstone of a guy who fought precisely 1.25, 1.25 times a year. We think they only fought once or twice a year usually. But we can hope to make a guesstimate on how long they fought for. The Emperor Hadrian was asked a very specific legal question. What should we do with Spanish cattle rustlers who've been condemned to gladiatorial school? And he replied, they can't be condemned to a school for more than 5 years, but they're only going to have to fight in the arena for 3. And scholars, including me, tend to generalize out from this one example because we don't have any other evidence and go, well, they probably, even the condemned criminals only fought for 3 years. So if we put it all together, if you only fought for 3 years, you only fought once a year. Let's put it the most optimistic here. 3 years, fighting once a year, 3 fights. You've only got a 1 in 8 chance of dying in each fight. You are statistically very likely to survive.
Can I sign up?
you actually, Brian, you just want the glory and the money. You want the
And the
adoring
money,
crowd.
absolutely.
You want the
If this
crowd.
is,
You want the crowd screaming your name.
I don't want the crowd screaming my name, but the prospect of just 1 or 2 battles in a year, 4 years maximum, and you get a fantastic cash prize, and you could possibly retire. Sure, why not?
Well, I mean, I think it's also a bit like modern boxing. I mean, boxing has always been a way out of a bad place for young guys who grow up in slum areas in bad conditions. Boxing offers a way out, and also I guess we've got to remember that a lot of young guys are thrill seekers. Extreme sports now show this. All contact sports show this. I mean, it's logically ridiculous to play a contact sport. You can get hurt really badly. You can get brain damage. You can. It's going to mess you up in later life. Doesn't stop hundreds of thousands of guys throughout the free Western world thinking, "Yep, I'll put my hand up. I want to be a boxer. I want to be a rugby player. I want to be a defensive guard at American football. To hell with the risk of concussion and brain damage, all those broken limbs. I'm going to do it. And I must say, as an ex-rugby player, there is a ludicrous, almost barbaric pleasure when you put the perfect tackle in on someone and you just flatten a guy. For those few seconds back in the day, I can remember, you feel like an alpha male briefly. You can then rub it in by helping the guy up, asking if he's all right.
But that's the virtue of sportsmanship, I suppose. It's never been personal. I mean, you tackle them, but you also help him get up.
Yeah, there is a slight sort of veiled insult in helping him get up, though, isn't there?
Of
But
course.
of course, I mean, that's the weird thing with gladiators is that quite often they had to fight guys, as it were, who were on their team, guys from their own gladiatorial school, guys they lived with, maybe actually literally, shared a barracks room with, guys they ate with, guys they went out drinking with, and then you'd have to fight them in the ring, and it's often suggested by modern scholars that most gladiators, the heavy guys, have a full face helmet that covers the face. And it's suggested it made it psychologically easier to fight someone you knew. Interesting, actually, the death blow, if the famous thumbs up, thumbs down, if you had to then execute your defeated opponent, almost all the blows from the gladiatorial cemetery at Ephesus are from behind and above. You're not looking the bloke in the eyes, which again would make it psychologically easier to actually kill someone who was your friend, I guess. Which is a
That
hideous
that's
prospect.
that's terrible and hideous, as you mentioned. But how many times did gladiators end up fighting their friends?
I think it's impossible to do statistics on stuff like this. We just don't have the evidence. We have scattered little, mainly tombstones. We've got about 300 odd tombstones of gladiators set up by either in the money they've left in their own will or by women describing themselves as their widows or other gladiators from the same school. It's the closest we get to really gladiators talking directly to us because the inscription on them almost always is in the first person. It will go, I was Diodorus the gladiator and I die. I was born here and I fought X number of times and I was killed there. It gives us for once a very direct line into the thought world of the gladiatorial schools, but we don't have. I mean, we have one which says that is about a man who's killed his friend. He provided the merciful blow that finished him off, as he puts it. They actually they're kind of weird gladiatorial tombstones and really, really fascinating. They tend to have visual relief carvings of the gladiator in his pomp and glory, sometimes looking quite idealized, a bit like Russell Crowe. In the Greek East half of the empire, gladiators on their tombstones want to pretend they're athletes, not gladiators, really, because athletes are young members of elite families, they're higher status. In the Western Latin-speaking half of the empire, they all pretend to be soldiers so they're trying to. They're, even in death, they're kind of aspirationally trying to improve their social status. But yes, gladiatorial tombstones are absolutely fascinating, and the closest you get to a gladiator actually talking to us, so from all those centuries ago,
Understood.
because obviously they didn't write the books. All the literary books are written by very rich members of the elite. So what you have there is a member of the elite talking about gladiators, with all the prejudices and things you'd expect from a member of the elite looking down on people who are way, way at the bottom of the social pyramid.
Right. I wonder what Karl Marx might have made of this had he visited Pompeii and parts of Rome and seen these gladiatorial tombstones.
Yeah, it would have been interesting. Doubtless they'd have been the representatives of the proletariat. Well, I mean, he did. I think he did talk about Spartacus quite a bit, and certainly Spartacus. Well, as in all the communist bloc football teams that used to be called Spartak. Yeah, the one-off huge gladiatorial revolt led by Spartacus did end up in communist thinking as a movement to the proletariat, which I don't think it was actually. I think it was an awful lot of enslaved people trying to not actually abolish slavery, which is weird. Instead, sort of just reverse the social pyramid, put them. We stop being slaves, we become masters. The people we beat, our former masters, become slaves. Really quite simple idea. Good rallying cry, though, if you are a brutalized and oppressed slave working on a chain gang.
Absolutely, it makes a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
you mentioned about Spartacus making these Roman generals fight one another. That was the perfect inversion of the Roman hierarchy.
Oh, absolutely. As something I sort of say and explore in the book is that it's almost surprising that more enemies of Rome don't do this. To turn this Roman institution, this cultural artifact, back on itself. I mean, Spartacus is said to have done it. Jewish rebels in North Africa are said to have done it. Hannibal, the great Carthaginian, is said to have done it. But you'd think Rome has lots of enemies. It's fighting all the time. It tends, throughout most of its history, to win the wars, but it loses a lot of battles. So, yeah, it's surprising that more outsiders don't think, right, we should turn this gladiatorial idea of making prisoners of war fight each other to death back on you.
Exactly. Now, how did gladiators, free men versus slaves in the Ludius, view one another? Was there some kind of informal or formal hierarchy within the training school?
There's certainly a hierarchy in terms of ranks. There's a system of tiers of gladiators. You start off as a beginner at the lowest rank, and you work your way up. We know that. Well, we think we know. It's referred to in a couple of literary texts written by members of the elite who are condemning free men who volunteered as gladiators. They claim that the slave gladiators don't want to be in the same cells, rooms, dormitories as them because they're so disgustingly immoral. There might be the key element, possible element of truth in that is that possibly free volunteers and slaves and condemned criminals and prisoners of war did actually mess separately, did sleep separately. We know that the free volunteers are very proud of their free status. It's big on their tombstones. They use, because Roman distinctively has three names. It's distinctive for the ancient world. So Gaius Julius Caesar, you have a praenomen Gaius, then the main family name, the nomen Julius, and then a branch of the family Caesar. And free volunteers always have the three names to show I was a free volunteer. Whereas guys who came from the other backgrounds just tend to have one name, or interestingly enough, quite often two. No, in the arena I was known as whatever, but my civilian name was something else. So it's interesting that although their tombstones set them up as gladiators, first and foremost in identity, albeit a bit like an athlete or a soldier, they don't totally lose their previous identity. Guys are still identifying themselves as, X from Alexandria, but I fought in Rome as Y, the gladiator, and they always have the type. But it's very hard. We just don't have the evidence to really know what within the school how they would have regarded each other. I mean, presumably there is a measure of envy from those who aren't free volunteers, because a free volunteer can buy himself out of the contract, or his family can at any point. And this is really not the case if you're a condemned criminal. Once Hadrian's made his ruling, you will fight for 3 years, and no amount of importuning, begging, pleading, or money can get you out. Whereas if you volunteered, your sister can come along, pay the money, and get you out. Rather like buying your way out of an army commission now.
Understood. Now, speaking about this Roman love for glory and also shame of being seen in the Colosseum or in the arena, how do you make sense of this love-hate relationship that free Romans had with gladiatorial combat?
It is a weird paradox, isn't it? Because on the one hand, they're the lowest of the low. they're equivalent. They are slaves or equivalent to slaves. They're right at the bottom of society. But on the other hand, they can become heroes. They can be celebrities. They can be the dom. They can become sex symbols. According to adult elite male writers, women go crazy for gladiators. Yeah, I think it's because the gladiators. The whole thing about gladiatorial combat in Rome is it's not about killing; it's about exhibiting endurance, skill, courage. And in Latin, that's virtus, a sort of courage, physical, but with a moral dimension. And the justification for gladiatorial combat remains the same, which is weird. Things don't usually remain the same for 600-700 years, but the justification always remains the same. If those social outcasts out on the sand can show courage close to the steel, it's a lesson for us citizens in the stands how much more we show if we're called upon to fight for Rome. And I think that's part of an explanation of the dichotomy of them being the lowest of the low, but occasionally revered, is that they are acting out this key building block, that Roman identity, virtues. It is how the Romans like to see themselves, how they constructed their identities. I mean, they were a martial race. This is a core value of theirs. And I think it's hard for us to get our imaginations and empathy with it because, in modern Western democracies, physical courage isn't the key building block of every male citizen's identity. Lots of other things are. But for the Romans, that was the key one. Without that, you just weren't a Roman.
Understood. What you just said, I can also sense this kind of hypocrisy in it that hypothetically the gladiator is an example of virtue, but we know that for the condemned slave fighting in the arena, it's the lure of the purse and the prospect of freedom, and for the crowds who were attending it, these were cheap thrills. Otherwise, these gladiators could have fought with wooden swords, and if it is purely about skill and dexterity, if they just had to perform the way that we have athletics today, or even boxing, sure, there is damage, but we try to minimize the risk of fatality. But here we are, it's the blood sport exists because there's this cheap thrill the audience seems to derive from it.
Yeah, it's that Schadenfreude German thing of we're safe in the stands. It comes out, I think, most weirdly for me in a thing called the Kena Libra, the free dinner. The night before gladiatorial games, the public were allowed into the gladiatorial barracks to watch gladiators eating a Last Supper. And for once, they got away from their bulking up Sagina dull stews and they had a really nice meal with good booze. And that must be a Schadenfreude thing because the people coming in know that, if I'm right, 1 in 8 of the guys eating will be dead by the following that time the next day. But you, of course, going in, know that you won't. And that is that kind of without death, it doesn't really work as the spectacle for the Romans. And of course, if they fought with wooden swords, then they wouldn't really, in Roman terms, be exhibiting virtues at all, because that'd just be a vague physical courage that lacks the true inner depths of male grace under pressure, to Nick Hemingway's phrase.
Understood. Now, speaking about Sagino, I understand the importance of bulking up, but why not also include regular rations of meat, given that there's going to be severe amounts of tissue damage and especially with the working out, you need to replenish body mass. Why not have a proteinaceous meal alongside the Saginos?
That's a very good question. It may well be partly a financial thing. Meat is very expensive in the ancient world. I mean, almost everyone in the ancient world is vegetarian almost all the time, not because of any principles or feelings for animals or whatever, but just because meat is so expensive. Most people can't afford it, except very, very rarely. It might also, with gladiators, be a feeling that a social disdain thing that the owners of the schools do not want to feed them very expensive food. That is also very distinctly the mark of members of the elite. I mean, this would be sort of perhaps transcending social boundaries in an unacceptable way. If you start feeding these criminals, ex-slaves, prisoners of war, and degraded free volunteers with the sort of stuff the senators should be eating, maybe that was just socially unacceptable.
Au contra, I would have thought that given that these are condemned men, they also get this Schadenfreude chance to have a meal that a senator might possibly aspire to.
Well, you give them a chance once, the day
Just
before
once.
they
That's
fight,
just that
just
once,
once.
right?
Yeah, it's a lot cheaper. It's a lot cheaper, and it's a deliberate inversion of the norm. So
Right.
yeah. I mean, there are all sorts of weird modern theories as to why they're allowed the sort of meal a senator would eat just once at the Canalibra. But I think the Canalibra. I think it's a really expensive meal the public are allowed in to watch for two very prosaic reasons. One, it shows off the generosity of the guy giving the games the next day. I'm not only putting on the games, look at the wonderful food and the wonderful wines I'm giving to these people. And I think there's another very prosaic reason. I think people go there to affect the betting. We know we know people betted on gladiatorial fights, and there's nothing like a bookmaker. It's like, I don't know, boxing matches or horse racing in the 1800s. It's two guys making a wager with each other, but odds would be involved. So if you go and watch the guys eating, the guy who's getting blind drunk is not going to be the guy I'm putting my money on. He's going out in the odds. The guy who's so scared he can't choke down any food, he's going out in the odds. And the guy who, as Plutarch, the Greek philosopher, says, is calmly ordering his affairs in case the worst happens. Yeah, he's coming in the odds. He's the favourite. He's the guy I want to back. We shouldn't. I mean, it's a whole. The day of the gladiatorial games is a sort of multi-entertainment package. You get the meal the night before, a big parade in the morning, animal fights, beast fights in the morning, man v animals, animals v animals. Some animals just exhibited. Then at lunchtime, you get executions of often put on in really spectacular ways. And then you finally get to the high point, you get the gladiators. And we think that they are graded like any playbill. You work at, you don't want to have your star fighters on first. Otherwise, everything's going to be an anticlimax. And then for the audience, when the gladiatorial fighting is over, that is when the giver of the games should start showering you with some gifts. And a rather, I don't know, quite nice way, they throw tokens are given. And then you take the little token to exchange it for your gift, but you don't know what you're getting. So you might get something really valuable, gold, silver, whatever, or you might end up with a cabbage. And we, I mean, it's a whole, and there's music throughout the day. In some lavish games, the organizer will distribute picnics into the stands. Perfume is dribbled onto the guys in the audience. It's an entire package, which the gladiators are the real high. Well, maybe they're the high point for some people. Maybe fighting for the tokens at the end is, because I mean, if you are one of the urban poor, getting one of the lucky tokens, it's just like the lottery in endless countries now. The odds against you getting the 14 million to one thing that changed your life are still 14 million to one. It doesn't stop guys thinking, yeah, I'll spend my hard-earned bucks buying loads of lottery tickets.
Right. So these were full day events, and one ticket covered you for the whole day, or was each event ticketed separately? Do we know something about that?
We do one ticket for the whole day, and the tickets are free.
Wow.
Well, it's because the guy giving it needs your vote, wants you on side, wants your popularity. So yeah, how the tickets were distributed, who got them, that is a complete mystery. We just don't know. We do know that there were commercial shows where you had to pay to go in. They were called Asifarana, and you paid an ass, a very small coin, to get in. Actually, you probably paid more than an ass. I mean, bad novels aren't called penny dreadfuls because we pay a penny for them. It's a judgmental, disparaging. It's a penny dreadful. It's only worth a penny. Asifarana, the same thing. You probably paid more than the tiny coin an ass. But they do all seem to be little shows out in the provinces where they don't have the big shows of Rome or the big local town. So for those, yes, you would have to pay. But in all the big amphitheatres that remain, the great ones, well, obviously the Colosseum, but also the great ones in France, Nîmes and Arles, or the ones in North Africa, no, these admission would be free. And however you got the ticket, we don't know how, that's the whole day's package for you.
Fantastic. And did we know if people packed food for the whole day, or did the sponsors also throw in food?
Sometimes we hear of sponsors throwing in food. I mean, these are the really lavish games. But yeah, we also hear of people packing picnics, and we also hear of street traders, food vendors outside. So at noon, at midday, when the executions are on, I mean, they're quite low down they're way low in the gladiators. We think people would have left the seats, gone outside, and there would have been a huge array of not only guys selling you sort of street food, but also merch. You get merchandising. This is when you can buy your little cheap lamp embossed with gladiators and other things. I mean, it's a complete media package. And in some ways, pretty similar to modern sporting events. I mean, you now walk in to one of the big stadiums and you have to just run the gauntlet of food stalls and guys selling you tatty shirts and caps and scarves and a load of other stuff you don't want.
Exactly. The Roman chapters, it's almost like after a brief interlude, we're back to where we began, except that this is at a much grander scale now.
Yeah, a much grander. That's actually, you saying a much grander scale reminds me of one thing. We always think, and we've been talking totally about gladiators, that, modern guys, we think of Rome and Roman entertainment and spectacle, we think gladiator. That's it, the Colosseum. It's important to realize that, yes, it is a huge draw. Ancient writers claim the Colosseum in Rome could seat 80,000 people. That is a big stadium even now. Archaeologists downplay it a bit and say, well, they can only work out how 50,000 could have got in there, but it's still a big stadium. But the Circus Maximus, the chariot racing grounds track on the other side of the Palatine, that's estimated it could seat 250,000 people, which is just a phenomenal. That's 1 in 4 of the population of the city of Rome. And also, we know from the 300s AD that there were chariot racing on a ludicrous number of days in the year. It's over 150, whereas there are only 4 regular gladiatorial fights in the Colosseum. So in terms of raw numbers, chariot racing was the big sporting spectacle. But of course, like in the old cliche, Christmas only comes once a year. The fact there were less gladiatorial fights, days of fighting, and less people could see them could actually possibly have made them even more special. There's no way, as a fan of the sport, you could get bored because there weren't enough. There just weren't enough events. Whereas chariot racing, I guess, unless you're a serious aficionado, you could think, yeah, I've been 5 times this month already. I can skip that one.
Understood. Now, speaking about emperors who fought in the arena, Commodus is one example who stands out. But were there other emperors who also had this vain idea of winning popularity by fighting in the sands of the arena?
Yes, there were, but they never went the whole hog and did it. We know of other emperors who trained in gladiatorial combat, and we know that of a few who had, as it were, practice matches in private, including Nero. But Commodus is the only emperor who goes the whole hog and actually fights in the Colosseum. And yeah, the contemporaries writers Cassius Dio and Herodian absolutely despise him for it. I mean, it's a very tricky thing being emperor. It's kind of a juggling act because you've got 4 key constituencies you really ought to try and conciliate. You've got the Senate, the army, the people of Rome, and the staff of the imperial palace, of which there are thousands, which we call the familia caesaris, slaves and ex-slaves who actually man the palaces on the Palatine. The problem is for an emperor that they all want you to do and be different things. So the senators want a dignified, first amongst equals senator. The army want a guy with a rough buzz cut who marches with the standard, sits on the grounds, and eats their rations with them. The plebs want someone who enters into their entertainment, and the familiar Caesaris, the imperial staff, want a hierarchical figure surrounded by ceremonies created by them. And Commodus is obviously goes hard for the appealing to the plebs by trying to appear as a gladiator. But this does, of course, mean that all the other groups in society that matter, Senate, army, and the familiar Caesaris, hate him for it. Although it's not actually any of them that really kill him; it's a palace coup. Um, it's not as I mean, it's if you're emperor, it's an incredibly difficult balancing act between four groups that want you to do and be a different thing every moment of the day. And only one of them might conceivably want you to dress up as a gladiator and fight in the arena.
Was this the only reason why he was murdered, that this man wanted to cosplay?
I think the cosplay fatally undermined his popularity and made his murder much more acceptable after the event. But no, it was, I think, purely personal reasons. I mean, it's a palace coup. Three people discover that he's likely to kill them. They act first. He's remarkably hard to kill. I mean, he's almost like Rasputin. I mean, they poison him and he survives. He goes to have a bath to recover from the effect. He doesn't realize he's been poisoned. He just thinks he's been sick. And so they have to send in a big, beefy Greek athlete who strangles him in the bath. Okay, it's not quite like Rasputin. I mean, I think they have to stab him, shoot him, poison him, and throw him in a river. But yeah, it's always actually killing an emperor is never as easy. A lot of emperors get killed, but it's not that easy to kill them. You have to choose your moment. And Commodus dies ingloriously in the bath. But I think the gladiator thing was maybe important, as I say, for the popular acceptance of his murder. He had just announced he was going to spend the night in the Ludus Magnus, the big main gladiatorial school in Rome, which is really cool because you can still see it. It's there on the other side of a big modern road from the Colosseum. It's just fascinating to actually look at the cells these guys lived in and their practice arena. But Commodus had announced he was going to spend the night there. And the next day, January the 1st, he was going to lead a procession to become consul of Rome, a fairly honorary position for an emperor. But he was going to do it dressed as a gladiator. And he was going to be escorted not by other senators, but by other gladiators. And this really is just going too far for most of the population of Rome.
Understood. I wish Commodus's murderers also had a flair for drama in them, that they could have switched Commodus's weapons in the arena with real ones instead of the fake swords that he gave to his opponents. They could have just given them real swords, and then you also, not only do you kill the emperor, you also put on a grand show.
I think that's a brilliant idea. In fact, if you and I were conspirators, I'd be going, "Oh, probably that's a great idea." But what if he wins?
If he
what if?
wins, sure, he learns a lesson. He might just become a better man.
Oh, and yeah, he might just kill us when he finds out what we've done.
When you see that he's winning, that's when you decamp for Asia Minor, right?
Yeah,
Asia Minor is the place where you escape to when you plot such intrigues. You just wait it out in Turkey and hope for things to cool down.
I think it's great. You tend to actually you've hit upon something that I've always been trying to suggest to my research students at Oxford to make a great doctoral thesis. Running away from the Roman Empire. Where do guys go? And they actually tend to try and go right across the Euphrates into modern Iraq or Iran to the Parthian and then the Persian Empire, because they're the only people who won't hand you back. The problem is if you run over some other border, the Roman diplomacy will say, look, to the local chieftain, either you give us Pravin, this terrible man who's tried to kill me, back, or I will send 5 legions in and kill everyone. And they go, yeah, you can have him back. Whereas the Persian king, and previously the Parthian king, as the other main light of the world might well think, no, I'll hang on to this guy because he could be quite useful as a declared opponent of the Roman Emperor. Sorry, I mean he might be useful in diplomacy in future. But yeah, it's amazing how few people make it across the Euphrates. Most of them get hunted. I mean, the vigor of the pursuit depends on how important the guy is. Obviously, very few make it. One or two just disappear. Maybe they're the really successful ones. The guys we don't know where this political opponent of the emperor went to. Um, there's a really good novel by a long dead English novelist called Alfred Duggan, which features this plot device. I don't think I'm spoiled. It's called Family Favorites, and it's written through the point of view of a man who has run away from Rome after being involved in lots of stuff. And it's in the opening, it's in the preface, so I'm not really giving a spoiler here in case any listeners want to read it. It's a great novel. He's living in modern Scotland on the other side of Hadrian's Wall. Yeah, I think if anyone found out where he was, the Romans just asked for him back, really.
I think in most cases, anyone fleeing from the emperor was likely caught by bounty hunters. This is what was the fate of most people who were troubled by the powers that be. Likely a bounty hunter turned them in for for a purse.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you don't really have to take them back. You just take their head back as proof.
Exactly.
I think it would make a good movie or a good novel. A Roman bounty hunter one. There probably are some. I've never seen either a novel or a movie, but Roman bounty hunters are very real. They existed. We've got lots of evidence for them. Yeah. Slave hunters, runaway slave hunters too. Kind of tricky to sell to a modern audience. We've got to make our hero busily re-enslaving people. I mean, he's got to be an anti-hero, surely.
Think about Spartacus and probably an alternate timeline for Spartacus. After breaking free, Spartacus decides to become a slaver.
Yeah, that would be ironic and cruel.
Ironic and cruel, but capricious and true to Roman sentiment.
Really interestingly, very few. There are next to no tombstones of people who actually identify themselves as slave traders, because even in a slave-owning society like Rome, that is just socially taboo. And I think we have one tombstone of a trader in gladiators, and he uses some weasel words to get around. He's a negotiator of the arena, or so. He uses some words that just slightly. He doesn't say I traded in gladiators. He kind of I was a businessman, rather like the mafia. Never say I'm a criminal. You go I'm a businessman of a certain sort, and yeah, you don't admit to being a slave trader or a gladiatorial trainer because of the social prejudice against you. Because people did think you'd done something that it was rather horrible. They might enjoy the results of what you do, but they want to distance themselves from you altogether.
I think it would make a lot of sense for slave traders and owners of ludi not to have tombstones and just be buried somewhere quietly so that at least you can enjoy a peaceful afterlife. If you put up your tombstone, the chances that some surviving gladiator might come and shit or pee on it is very
That's a good
high.
that's a very good point. And we know there are so many tombstones and tombs that have warnings, curses to anyone who pisses or shits on the tomb. Yeah, absolutely.
This conversation's panning out in ways I'd not imagined, but this is fun. I think this is the spirit of Roman society, this schadenfreude and capriciousness that runs through and through it across all echelons of society.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, my next question is going to be about Artemidorus and his interpretation of dreams. Why does this feature gladiators in dreams?
Right. Bit of back. Artemidorus was a Greek writing in the late second century AD under the Roman Empire, obviously, and it's a guidebook on how to be a dream diviner. And Artemidorus, it's a fascinating document. He claims that he has gone out and all the dreams in this long book are genuine case studies of dreams that people have had. And obviously, we can only dream about stuff we can think about. It's a direct line into the thought world of the Greek speaking half of the Roman Empire. Okay, it's kind of weird way in. I mean, a lot of the dreams are weird dreams. I mean, there's the flying, you dream sort of physically impossible things like flying around the rooftops of Rome. There's a very, very strange one. I don't know why it stuck in my mind. A man kept dreaming that he was feeding cheese to his own penis.
Oh.
Why? God knows. Odd one, that. And there's a lot of worrying dreams of people having sex with statues. Unsurprisingly, Sigmund Freud just loved this book because there are dreams. There's a whole section on dreaming of having sex with people you shouldn't have sex with, hence Oedipus complex and Freud. Anyway, in the middle of it, scattered throughout it, are people dreaming about gladiators. And it does show automatically that the old Victorian idea, the Greek half of the empire never took to gladiatorial combat, is just wrong. Yeah, these are guys, Greeks, who are dreaming about gladiators. What's very interesting is that Artemidorus doesn't need to explain the types of gladiators. He just transliterates from Latin into Greek, secutor, Thracian, murmelo. He doesn't need to say what they are because he assumes his readership know. My favorite bit of it is a long section on if you dream about fighting as a gladiator and you're a young, unmarried man, the type of gladiator you fight indicates the character of the woman you'll marry. And rather worryingly, 8 out of the 9 examples were all bad. I mean, Artemidorus is not a guy who's keen on marriage. The one you really don't want to marry is the Retiarius, the net and trident fighter, because just as he runs around the arena avoiding his opponent, your future wife will run around sleeping with all your friends.
I
It's
read
a
that. Sorry, go on.
it's a crazy sort of offbeat, strange angle way into the thought world of the Roman Empire. But yeah, gladiators there, they're hardwired into the thinking of Greeks under the empire.
Gladiators are hardwired into the thinking of the Greek Empire, but also is sexism so hardwired into their thought? I mean, why not these dreams be emblematic of the men who are dreaming them? I mean, if it's a Retiarius that you see in your dream, likely is more an attestation to your own character flaw that you will feed at any trough that you see fit, be it Roman senators or gladiators.
No, you're absolutely right. But no, it's the thought world created by Artemidorus's weird text is thoroughly misogynistic. It's thoroughly urban based too. He really doesn't like the countryside. He says at one point the only good thing about being in the dreaming you're in the countryside is that you can actually take a shit wherever you like. and the other good thing are there lots of roads to get out of the countryside and back to a town. It's it's I think it sort of unconsciously reveals an awful lot about Artemidorus's thinking, and by extension from him, Greek elite thinking about the year 200 AD. Whether it's and also the Roman Empire tends to impinge Roman authorities always in a bad way. You think about the Roman legal system or a Roman governor, and it's almost always going to predicate something really bad is going to happen in your life. And there's a recent new translation of Artemidorus in a paperback in the Oxford Classic series. It's really well worth reading because it is just so weird, and it's such an unusual slant. Gives us such a different view of the Roman Empire and a very intimate view. Bits of it are very funny, bits of it are really quite alarming and quite shocking. And again, as you said, so Pravin, it brings out this, as you implied, that thing that was fascinated me about the Romans, because in some ways they are really like us. And then suddenly, in other ways, they are as alien from our mentality and thinking as possibly could be. And it's that kind of weird tension between the two that makes studying them so interesting. Also, I think, guess makes us reflect on ourselves because you can't not think about the cultures we live in when you're thinking, gosh, that's really like us, or wow, that's really different. We're still really thinking not just about the Romans and the Greeks, but about ourselves too.
Absolutely. It's a damn shame that the interpretation of dreams has already been translated. I was about to suggest you should take a dig at this, given that you have historic precedents writing about gladiators. You could add your information into that book and make it even more fun reading. I think it'd be worth a really good laugh. I mean, we both have a great time discussing this book. I mean, Sigmund Freud clearly missed out the more salacious parts of it, like a man feeding his own penis cheese. He should have dedicated a chapter to this instead of the Oedipus complex.
I think the phallic cheese concept would have been
Exactly.
yeah. I What I've done mainly with Artemidorus until Those Who Are About to Die, the Gladiator book, is in my novels, the Warrior of Rome series, anytime any character has a dream, it's taken from Artemidorus. And then I play around with the interpretation and usually decide to change the interpretation into the exact opposite. It's just a sort of sad little literary game I like playing now and then. Which reminds me, I don't think I've had a fictional character dreaming of feeding a cheese to his penis yet. I must put that in the next novel. But I mean, there are several thousand dreams in there, so there's such riches to pick from.
This was perhaps one of the craziest chapters in across the entire book. I mean, sure, you read it while you read through the book, it's so relatable with the Roman, be it the Roman emperors, be it the people or the gladiators, and then you encounter Artemidorus and his weird interpretation of dreams. Okay, where is this coming from? Why is this taking such a weird tangent? But sure, it's all part of the ride.
It's all part of the ride. I think, yeah, he also, I mean, it's the gladiators, really. Thank goodness he talked about, thank goodness for my book, people were dreaming about gladiators. It just fitted so well. Because
Indeed.
when you're doing research, there are always those moments when you finished a book, and as you were saying at the start, once the book's in print and it's out there and it's published, I mean, yeah, you can do a second edition. I never want to because when I finished a book, I want to move on to another. But the book is done, it's published, and that is always the moment you find a piece of evidence that would have fitted so well in the book. And I did with the Gladiator book because I kind of end it talking about was popular philosophy could it have been drawn on by gladiators to encourage fatalism? The Stoic line, Stoic and Epicurean line, if you weren't in pain before you were born, why do you expect to be in pain after you're dead? This is all there is. Death is just a return to quiet and sleep. And as soon as the book was published, I was in northern Greece in Beroia and went to the little provincial museum there. And I found a gladiator's tombstone I'd never seen before, which had a line from a Stoic philosophy carved on it. Exactly that line. If you weren't in pain before, why do you expect to be in pain after? Damn, if only I'd known that. I could have just quoted it instead of, you know, the entire last paragraph could have led towards that quote, but hey, the book was already out. That's the thing with books; they would keep changing, but I think in a way it's good we have to stop them with deadlines and publishing deadlines because otherwise there'd be a temptation just to keep tinkering with a thing, and maybe you'd never finish it. Maybe it'd be like Samuel Beckett, the great Irish writer, said, "No book's ever finished; it's just eventually abandoned." I mean, you have to stop at some point.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with Beckett. This is, otherwise, you just keep tinkering with it on and on and on endlessly, and it'll never get told.
And also, maybe you'll make it worse because yeah, I kind of like to research books really slowly, and so I can confront all the original primary evidence. Then I can read all, not all, as much as I can. I think is relevant and I have time of the modern scholarship. But then I like to write them as quickly as possible because I think if you take too long, it kind of like milk or something, it starts curdling. You just need to get those ideas tapped into the laptop as soon as possible. You can always go back and change them before the book comes out, but just don't spend months thinking about the same thing because you'll tie yourself in a knot. So what you like, what's the cliche, Hunter? You can't see the wood for the trees. You just disappear down a rabbit hole. I think that's enough cliches of confusing yourself.
I agree. I agree. Now, moving on to the next question is going to be about the politics of executions. Who decides who gets to fight as a gladiator and who doesn't get that opportunity, only to get their heads or other parts of their body chopped off?
Okie dokie. Despite the enormous and really impressive edifice of Roman law, if we have huge Roman legal texts survive, if you look at it through the eyes of a modern lawyer, it looks really wonderful and it looks like it works. Except it was actually slightly random. In each judge has almost limitless powers of what they do in each court case. So I'm afraid it was purely on you, the judge you were in front of, when you were condemned for murder, for whatever, temple robbing. He decided there and then whether you'd be executed or sent to a gladiatorial school. So it's just a roll of the dice, pure luck, pure chance.
Oh dear, that doesn't
Yeah.
sound good. I mean, there's no
You
precedent or anything.
There are precedents, but the judge, if it's the emperor, of course, his will is law anyway. So, but by changing it, he's set a new precedent. And yeah, provincial governors who have the power of life and death are meant to follow precedent, but the degree of central imperial control over them actually is very, very limited while they're in office. Things tend to happen to them after they set down, or rather like modern politicians. While you're in office, very little can touch you. When you've left it, that's when you have to worry. But yeah, I think it was a roll of the dice. How that judge was feeling on that day depends whether you just get killed or sent to the arena. Because with the executions, Romans had two main ways of killing people: citizens and the upper classes should be beheaded. It's meant to be relatively quick and relatively painless. Slaves at the other end, or non-citizens, could be crucified, which is unbelievably painful and a lingering death. Now, for the executions in the amphitheatre at noon, at midday, neither of those are going to work because killing someone by beheading them is just over in a flash. And anyway, the sort of people who are being condemned to be killed there are not high status citizens. So you'd be dignifying these criminals with too dignified a death. Whereas crucifying just takes too long because they could still be alive the next day or the day after. I mean, I believe it can take up to 3 days to die when you're crucified. So that's why the Romans invent lots of new ways of killing people in the arena. And obviously they throw people to wild animals. Doesn't always work because wild animals don't always kill people. I mean, there's obviously Androcles and the lion. That's the guy who had lived in a cave with a lion in North Africa, and by pure luck in the story, they both end up in the Colosseum, and the lion recognizes him because he'd pulled a thorn out of the lion's paw all those years before, so the lion licks him, and they're both released. Isn't that wonderful? But the Romans kill people in all sorts of ways and horrible ways. These sort of spectacular theatrical executions in which the condemned man or woman is forced to act out something from Greek myth. So Hercules in Latin, in the myth, his wife was tricked into giving him a tunic soaked in poison. The pain was so much, Hercules burnt himself to death on a funeral pyre. So you put this in the arena, and the tunica molesta, the evil tunic, the condemned man is forced to wear a tunic which is impregnated with inflammable stuff. Then they set fire to it, and he runs around dying. Or there's acting out the myth of Icarus and Daedalus. So you put the condemned man, you stick some wings on his back, you have a crane move him out over the arena, and he's released, and oddly enough, the wings don't work and he dies. Or Orpheus, in myth, he's torn apart by some women who are maddened by the god Dionysus. And this was a big spectacle one that we know of in Rome. The condemned man is actually playing the lyre. Lots of stage set rises up, he appears, and because Orpheus in the myth, his music charmed animals, so lots of animals are around him. And he also charmed inanimate things. So in the stage set, trees and rocks move towards him. And the animals, some are not fierce and some are fierce, but they're actually tame ones. And then at the last moment, a trapdoor opens and a bear comes out and rips him limb from limb. Now, the weird thing about all these is that none of the myths in the arena, acted out in the arena, end the way they did in the Greek myth. So it's sort of a hideous snuff play in which the audience actually don't know the ending. And they don't know the ending because now and then the guy is actually pardoned. The Emperor Gallienus condemns a man to the lions, and a big cage comes up through a trapdoor, and there's fierce noises, and then the cage opens, and a cockerel steps out, and the guy's given a pardon. This is presumably how they got the condemned people to act out the myth, because there is that really, really tiny chance that you'll be one of the handful of lucky condemned criminals who isn't actually going to die, and you will take part in the spectacle and then live. So presumably the guy playing Orpheus is desperately looking at the first animals and thinking, oh, it's a lion. Oh, it's tame. Oh, it's a tiger. It's tame. And then the poor devil, just when he thinks he might be the lucky one, that's when the trapdoor opens and the bear comes out. But yeah, an awful lot of, in our terms, utterly sadistic ingenuity is put into these shows. I think these are the most alien things of all to us. Gladiatorial combat, yes, it is very alien to us, but it isn't as alien as this. But then again, maybe we're not taking the right historical perspective. Public executions at Tyburn in London, they drew enormous crowds until they were stopped. Tens of thousands of people wanted to go and watch guys be hung, drawn, and quartered in London. So it's it may in the long-term history be that we're the exceptional ones who don't, as opposed to the Romans who just fit into the long picture. But yeah, it's a very strange thing. They devoted a lot of time, effort, and money and novelty, especially these incredible stage sets where sort of mountains rise up out of the floor, whole forests move, animals are tamed. It also, of course, symbolizes the Roman emperor and the empire's control over nature. We can make stuff happen in the arena that doesn't happen in real life.
Wouldn't this leave the audience rather nonplussed as opposed to gladiatorial combat where you expect one way or another death or at least a draw is certain. But here with these kind of executions, even the audience doesn't know what to expect. I mean, the story is not going according to plot. You expect a lion, a cockerel comes out, or
I think, well, the thing is, these are the people being executed are dehumanized outsiders. And it's a very visceral way of the authorities warning the audience, if you transcend the boundaries of what's acceptable in Roman society, you won't be sitting in the seats having a picnic up there. You will be out in the sands, and you too could. I mean, it's a real serious blood warning to obey the structures of that culture and that society.
understood. Strange and paradoxical. Now, speaking about which, especially at executions, why is it that early Christians formed such a huge bulk of people who were executed? Why did these Christians seek out this kind of, as you mentioned, graphic methods of dying? It's one thing to die in an arena in combat where you have fair chance. It's another to die on a cross. Sure, understandable. You've been condemned, but with such odd or unknown ways of dying, this
Yeah.
sets up the plot even more intrigue to the plot.
Well, First of all, we're not quite sure how many Christians did die in the arena because it's very much in the interest of Christian writers to maximize the numbers. Look how many martyrs our faith has had. And also, the volunteering, the voluntary martyrdom thing is deeply puzzling. The church fathers, the sort of leaders of the early church and the writers we have, are actually quite strongly opposed to this voluntary martyrdom because it is getting awfully close to suicide, and suicide in Christianity is a sin. But yes, guys did it. I am a Christian, I want to die. Um, the Roman governor in the Christian Martyr Acts usually goes out of his way to try and dissuade them. Please don't have a few days to think about it and change your mind. No, don't. Look, just make an offering to the emperor, traditional gods, just a pinch of incense onto that altar. You don't need to mean it. Just say the words. But no, inevitably, I'm a Christian. I want to die. I think the appeal of, as it were, voluntary martyrdom for some early Christians who are, in the main, in the stories, young men, is a fast track to heaven. I mean, it has been compared by some people to sort of suicide bombers, Islamist suicide bombers, because it is, however, it's always young men, almost always young men, who can be convinced that this is the fast track to heaven. But no, it's a weird thing. The early Christian martyr acts to read, they're designed as Christian propaganda. Look how brave our predecessors and people of this generation were. They actually are meant to show the Roman governor as completely ignorant, boorish, obviously a pagan, but just doesn't get the whole point of Christianity. Except, read from a modern perspective, sometimes you begin to have quite a lot of sympathy with the governor who's just trying to get through his day's work without, and then people start shouting, I'm a Christian, I want to die. And one he goes, the voice came from outside the room, and the governor goes, who said that? Oh, bring him in. And then, I'm a Christian, I want to die. And the governor replies, don't you people have any ropes or rocks or cliffs around here? As in, can't you just go and kill yourself some other way?
This precise paragraph reminds me of Mikhail Bulgakov's work, Master and Margarita.
What a
Ponti-
wonderful novel. Wonderful
it
novel that
was
is.
Pontius Pilate's having a pounding headache, and here he is. This man's irritating him and doesn't address him by his rightful name. And then he decides, I'm going to whack him for it. You will address me as hegemon,
That
not
is
my
one of
good man.
that is brilliant. I'd forgotten that bit in it. Bulgakov was superb. I mean, that's one of the annoying things about Christians when they're hauled in to be tried. The standard Roman formula was name, race, free or slave, and they always reply, "I'm a Christian." And one governor goes, "Well, you may well be, but they aren't any of the questions I asked you."
Well, you
Let's
may well be, sure.
sure,
Next.
sure. Okay, let's try that again. Name, race, free or slave. I'm a Christian. Oh, goodness sake. One thing about Christianity and Rome is that up until the third century AD, all the Roman authorities didn't persecute Christians as an empire-wide thing. What tended to happen is more bottom-up model. So there's a local problem, and some locals decide to blame the Christians, and locals haul them before the governor, and then the governor has to deal with it to quell any riots or unrest. It's only in the third century AD that emperors actually pass edicts persecuting Christians, and that's because by the 200s AD, the empire is in a bad way. Barbarian invasions, civil wars, too many emperors in too few years, massive inflation. Something has gone wrong. And if you're a traditionally minded Roman pagan, Rome's salus, its safety, its health, depends on the Pax Deorum, the peace of gods, or better translator is the pact with the gods. We do right by the gods will do right by us. If everything's going wrong in the empire, clearly something is wrong with the Pax Deorum. And here's this group of very flamboyant atheists, because Christians are atheists, paganized because they deny the existence of the pagan gods. And we're letting them walk around propagandizing their stuff. That must be why the gods are annoyed with us. And that's what causes first the Emperor Decius in 250 AD, 251 AD. I'm very bad with dates. To issue an edict that every inhabitant of the empire must sacrifice traditional gods. It doesn't work. And then later in the 250s, the Emperor Valerian passes two edicts specifically targeting Christians must worship the traditional gods. And I kind of think that Christianity was really lucky, and it was those two emperors that started persecuting them. Because in 200 AD, Christianity is a minority. To most people, it's a weird minority Eastern cult. By 300 AD, 100 years later, it's become kind of a much bigger player in the religious economy, religious landscape. And the reason is, I think, that what happened to the two emperors who persecute Christians the first time on an empire-wide scale. Decius is the first emperor to die in battle with the barbarians against the Goths somewhere near the Danube, a place called Abruzzus. And Valerian is captured alive by the Persians and is used as a mounting block by the Persian king for his captivity. Every time the Persian king Shapur wants to go out riding, he has the aged Roman emperor come out, get on his hands and knees, puts his boot between his shoulders, and always says the same words: "This is true, not the lies of the Romans." And then he mounts his horse. And when poor old Valerian finally dies, they have his skin stripped off and stuffed with straw and dyed purple and hung in the main audience hall at Ctesiphon, the Persian capital, the very place that Roman ambassadors have to come to see the Persian king. And there is their previous emperor floating above their heads, hanging from the ceiling. That's serious political spin. But I think it's the weird and horrible fate of Decius and Valerian, the first two emperors who initiate empire-wide persecutions. And it really encourages Christianity. I mean, Christians then think, good God, well, of course they think, good God, they're Christians. Look what happens to men who persecute the faithful, persecute us. But equally, I think pagans, presumably with the fate of those two emperors, are thinking maybe there is something after all in that weird crucified God that we've never really understood, haven't really thought about at all. And I think that's maybe those two historical accidents kind of paved the way for Constantine and his acceptance of Christianity about 300 AD, right at the end of the crisis. Anyway, that's a very that's my personal take on the rise of Christianity. There are dozens of other reasons, but that is one that kind of I think is often overlooked. Just the pure historical chance that the first two persecutors meet such horrible fates.
Exactly. I love the fact that you are not using words like destiny or manifest destiny, predisposition. It's just a random chance. It's just a roll of the die. Things could have gone either way if Roman governors had chosen to ignore this weird Eastern cult. Would not have seen the Christians anymore. We would have probably been Manichaeanism would have probably been a world
Yeah,
religion today, and Mithras would replace Jesus. But here we are.
exactly. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's always very easy to look back with hindsight, isn't it? And then this is
Exactly.
just, yeah. Whereas in fact, all history is contingent, and it's the chaos theory thing of one butterfly flapping its wings in the Amazon creates a hurricane somewhere else. One tiny change could have put the whole train on different rails. Yeah, absolutely. And
Right.
Diocletian and his persecutions, maybe, as has been said, often too little, too late. By that time, Christianity is a gathering force.
Understood. My last question is when did the blood sport finally end and why?
Tough, tough one to answer. Our last evidence for it is in about 425 AD in Rome. A series of medallions that were printed. Printed? You don't print medallions. What do you do? Make medallions. Um, you die cut medallions. Anyway, the
Or you mint
medallions.
them. You
You
mint
mint.
them,
That's the word.
right?
Thank you. That's the word I was failing to find. These medallions are minted in Rome about 425 to celebrate games given by Roman consuls. Um, it seems they fade away. There are two main schools of thought. Why does it stop? One is it's just economics. From the late 200s onwards, the empire is financially in a worse position. Gladiatorial shows cost millions and they fade away because people can't afford them anymore. The other one is which comes in two ways, is the Christian thing. Christian writers in the 300s AD claimed that Constantine converts to Christianity and he banned gladiatorial combat. It's not actually true. I mean, yes, he converts at least by his deathbed, but he never banned gladiatorial combat. He banned Christians from being condemned to gladiatorial schools, entirely different from banning the entire spectacle. But I do think it's Christianity that causes the death of it, because once Constantine's on the throne and favouring Christianity, then we have the historical accident that, apart from Julian the Apostate, the rest of that century is Constantine's dynasty, who are all promoting Christianity. And if you're giving career advancement and tax breaks to members of the elite if they join your religion, basically guys possibly will sign up anyway. Yeah, those who don't have a deep commitment to another faith. Um, and so I think once the elite of Rome start becoming Christianized, at least outwardly, they're not going to spend their money on gladiatorial games. They're going to spend it on more Christian things, building a church, giving alms to the poor, doing more Christian. They're still going to be doing acts of conspicuous expenditure to maintain and advance their status. Look how generous I am to the world. But the form it takes is no longer going to be funding gladiatorial games. It's going to be something else. So I think Christianity does kill gladiatorial combat, but kind of does it indirectly, not in the model of later Christian writers. Constantine just banned it because he didn't, because it lasts for another 100 years. So yeah, that's my take on that. Why it all dies.
Right. In a way, it's a good thing that this barbaric practice ended of putting men to fight one another. But
Yeah,
in other
absolutely.
ways, it still continues. This strain of violence and violent fantasies continues with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And violent contact sports we were talking about earlier, and also violent video games. Um, and let's face it, a UFC is not that far from gladiatorial combat. I mean, it makes boxing or rugby or American football look like Scrabble or chess. It is a seriously violent thing. In fact, I find that one quite worryingly violent. One of my sons loves watching it, but every now and then I'm just wincing, thinking, "Oh, geez, that's just too much." But I guess we're all hypocrites, and we all have shifting boundaries in all sorts of tastes. Who am I
Right.
to judge?
That's all right. I mean, personally find UFC to be fake as compared to rugby or football. That's the prospects of getting damaged by a quarterback is very real in a rugby game.
Yeah, I mean the prospect of getting hurt by a very large guy running at full speed at you is pretty seriously high.
Exactly,
Um,
yes.
yeah, I mean, I can honestly say and have said in interviews that when I was playing, I was one of those guys who was basically terrified in the changing room beforehand, and I had to go through all sorts of personal rituals just to get myself out on the field. But then the weird thing when you're a young guy is once you've taken the first big hit, you've been tackled or you tackle someone, then you suddenly think, yeah, I remember how to do this. And actually, it's quite fun. Main fear then I was found was letting the other guys down. And then you start doing the stuff properly because it's like a lot of military psychology and the buddy theory. You don't do it for any cause; you just do it because you don't want to be humiliated in front of the peer group that are immediately around you, which encourages you all to do this stuff.
Right.
which doesn't work for gladiators because usually they're fighting on their own.
That's true. Are there any other books on gladiators and blood sport that you'll be writing soon?
No, like I said earlier, I when I've done one book, I like to move on. And my next book is another history book, and it's got a provisional title of Libertas, as in liberty in Latin, the Emperor, the Poet, and the Fall of the Roman Republic. I'm going to do a narrative of the fall of the Roman Republic. How and why did it fall? And I'm going to try and view it through the eyes of obviously the first emperor, Octavian, who becomes Augustus, but also a poet, and not one of the really obvious ones. I've not gone for Virgil or Horace or Ovid or Propertius. I've gone for a guy called Cornelius Gallus because he's always interested me. And he was both a poet, the founder of Latin love poetry, love elegy, but he was also a general and a politician. And a bit of a spoiler, he also met a tragic end. So he's got a lot going for him as one of the points of view you're viewing these really serious events that change the Western world, change European history. So yeah, that should be it'll be fun to do in the main. Most right. Well, I don't know. Will it be fun? Most of it's fun, but I always there's an English novelist of the last century called Kingsley Amis, who was a brilliant comic novelist who I liked, who won the Booker Prize and kind of forgotten now. But he once said this great line in an interview. He said there are two kinds of writing. There's the stuff you know will be bloody difficult, and then there's the stuff you think will be easy, but turns out to be bloody difficult.
I can imagine might fall in the latter category. I worry.
Well, I hopefully most of it will turn out to be okay, but yeah, there are times when you're writing a book, because it is a kind of solitary thing. You are thinking, why the hell am I doing this? And will anyone read it? But hey, once it's published, yeah, it's a good fit. It's to walk into a bookshop and see a whole load of your books on the shelves is just an amazing buzz. Really, I haven't got. I mean, this is Those Are About to Die is my 19th book. But even so, the day it comes out, I drive to a big bookstore just so I can see it, just to check it's real.
I can
Check
imagine how that feeling must be. I mean, imagine Artemidorus discovering a copy of his book today in a British bookstore.
he'd be blown away, wouldn't he? Well, in fact,
Exactly.
yeah, he would. I'm not expecting my books to last for 2,000 years, though.
You never know. You never know. A good story lasts for a very long time.
Yes, true. I mean, and luckily, so far, all the novels are still in print from the first one in 2008. So, yeah, I mean, I also, guys, I keep finding novelists that I'd not heard of and historians. I mean, they're long dead. And I think, well, how did I never know about this book published way back in the 1970s, 1980s, whenever? So, yeah, you're right.
And so it goes. Thank you for this conversation, Harry, and for authoring Those Who Are About to Die. I enjoyed reading this, and this conversation is even more fun as compared to reading it. So this twice told of Those Who Are About to Die is quite the adventure.
Bro, I'm really glad you enjoyed the book. And no, this was a great, fun conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks again.
It went all over the shop, but that made it better.
It did, it did. For once, we rambled all over the place, but this just ended up enriching the conversation. Any other book, I would have probably been, I need to stick to the topic. But this here is so much, it's got so many little side tracks and rabbit holes. It's easy to get lost in one and then come out of the other.
Thank goodness for that. Yeah, hopefully that shows the book works. That's what I wanted it to do.
I'm sure this book will have a life of its own.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks again, Harry. Have a great evening.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye.